I've always prided myself on being observant. It's not that I'm paranoid or suspicious by nature, I simply notice things. The way people's smiles don't always reach their eyes, the slight hesitation before someone answers a question, the calculated innocence in a voice that's trying just a little too hard to sound helpless. That's how I first noticed Emma. My husband David came home one evening about 3 months ago, distracted in that particular way that meant work was weighing on his mind. I'd poured us both wine and settled onto the couch beside him, waiting for him to unwind enough to talk about whatever was bothering him. There's this new project coordinator at work, he'd finally said, swirling the wine in his glass. Emma, she's struggling with the database management system, and I've been trying to help her get up to speed. That's kind of you, I'd replied, meaning it. David had always been generous with his time and expertise. She's really sweet, but she just seems so overwhelmed by everything. I feel bad for her. She nearly cried in the break room today because she couldn't figure out the reporting templates. A small alarm bell had rung in my mind then, though I'd kept my expression neutral. She cried over reporting templates? Well, almost cried. She's just very sensitive, I think. And she's new, so everything probably feels like a lot. I'd let it go that night. People react to stress differently after all. But over the following weeks, as David mentioned Emma with increasing frequency, her computer problems, her confusion about protocols, her apparent inability to perform basic tasks without his guidance, I began to pay closer attention. The pattern became clear the first time I met her. David's company had organized a casual Friday evening mixer at a local restaurant, and spouses were invited. I'd been looking forward to finally putting faces to the names I'd been hearing, and I dressed carefully in a navy dress that was professional but approachable. Emma had been standing near the bar when we arrived, and I'd recognized her immediately from David's description. Petite, with carefully styled blonde hair and wide blue eyes that seemed designed to convey perpetual innocence. She wore a pale pink dress that made her look younger than her 28 years. "David," she'd called out, her face lighting up as she spotted us. She'd hurried over, and I'd noticed the way her hand lingered on his arm as she greeted him. "I'm so glad you came. I was worried I wouldn't know anyone here." "Emma, this is my wife, Sarah," David had said warmly, oblivious to the way Emma's smile had tightened almost imperceptibly when he'd emphasized the word wife. "Oh, it's so wonderful to meet you," Emma had gushed, taking my hand in both of hers. "David talks about you all the time. You're so lucky to have such a patient, helpful husband. I don't know what I'd do without him at work. He's basically been my lifeline." The performance had been flawless. The admiring glances at David that she'd tried to disguise as simple gratitude. The way she'd positioned herself to subtly exclude me from their conversation about work. The theatrical sigh when she'd mentioned how completely lost she felt with the new project software. "It's just so complicated," she'd said, looking up at David with those wide eyes. "I stayed late 3 nights this week trying to figure it out, and I still feel like I'm drowning. I'm probably just not smart enough for this job." I'd watched David's expression soften with sympathy, and I'd felt a mix of amusement and mild irritation. Not at him. He was exactly the kind of person who would rush to help someone who appeared to be struggling. That's one of the things I loved about him, but at her manipulation of his kindness. "You're plenty smart," David had assured her. "The system is just counterintuitive. I'll sit with you next week and walk you through it again." "Would you?" Emma's gratitude had been effusive. "You're such a lifesaver. David, seriously, I don't know what I'd do without you." I'd smiled pleasantly through the entire exchange, but I'd also noticed the way Emma's helplessness seemed to vanish when she'd been talking to other colleagues, particularly the senior partners who had no reason to be impressed by a damsel in distress routine. The woman could navigate complex social dynamics with the precision of a chess master. She just conveniently forgot how to use basic office software whenever my husband was around. I'd decided that evening that I would watch and wait. I'm not the type to create drama over suspicions, and I trusted David completely. Emma's little crush, if that's what it was, would likely burn itself out once she realized it was going nowhere, but I'd underestimated her persistence. 2 weeks later, I was having lunch with my mother-in-law, Rachel, at her favorite cafe downtown. Rachel and I had always gotten along exceptionally well. She was sharp, funny and refreshingly direct in a way that reminded me of my own mother. More importantly, she adored David but had no illusions about the fact that other women might find him attractive. "So, this Emma person," Rachel said after I'd casually mentioned the situation over salmon salads, "she's making a play for my son?" "I wouldn't put it quite that boldly," I replied, though I appreciated her directness. "It's more like strategic helplessness. She's positioned herself as someone who needs his help constantly, and she's very good at making it seem genuine." Rachel's eyes had narrowed with interest. "And David hasn't noticed?" "David thinks she's genuinely struggling and that he's being a good colleague by helping her." "Men," Rachel had said with affectionate exasperation, "they can be brilliant and completely oblivious at the same time. My late husband once spent 6 months not noticing that his secretary was wearing progressively more revealing outfits to work. When I finally pointed it out, he was shocked. But she's always so professional." She'd mimicked his surprised tone perfectly, and I'd laughed despite myself. "I'm not worried about David," I'd assured her. "I know where his loyalty lies, but I am getting a bit tired of hearing about Emma's various crises and how only David can solve them." Rachel had leaned forward, a mischievous glint in her eye. "You know what I think? I think little Miss Helpless needs to be reminded that the world doesn't revolve around her manufactured problems. And more importantly, David needs to see what's really going on." "I'm not interested in creating drama." "No drama," Rachel had interrupted. "Just subtle observation, strategic awareness, and possibly a little bit of covert justice." I'd raised an eyebrow. "Covert justice?" "Trust me, darling, I've been managing difficult personalities for 40 years. Sometimes the best way to deal with someone who's playing games is to change the rules without them noticing." Rachel's campaign of covert justice had begun innocently enough. She'd started dropping by David's office occasionally, bringing lunch or coffee, always cheerful and grandmotherly. Emma, who seemed to have a sixth sense for when David was in his office, would inevitably appear with some urgent question or crisis. The first time it happened, Rachel had watched the performance with interest. Emma had knocked on David's open door, her expression troubled. "David, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I'm completely stuck on the Hendricks account. And the deadline is tomorrow, and I just..." She'd noticed Rachel then and had immediately shifted gears. "Oh, I didn't realize you had a visitor. I can come back." "Nonsense," Rachel had said warmly. "I'm just David's mother, dropping off lunch. You must be Emma. David's mentioned how hard you've been working." Emma had preened slightly at this. "I'm trying my best, but some of this software is just so challenging." "Technology," Rachel had commiserated. "It's amazing how complicated they make everything these days. Though I do find it interesting. My friend's daughter works in your field, and she was just telling me how user-friendly these new database systems are compared to what they used to use. Almost intuitive," she said. The comment had been delivered with perfect innocence, but I'd heard about it later from David, who'd mentioned it in passing. Emma's expression had apparently flickered with something harder before she'd recovered. "Well, everyone learns differently," Emma had said tightly. "Of course," Rachel had agreed. "Some people just need more hand-holding than others." From that day forward, Rachel had made it her mission to observe Emma's behavior patterns. She'd noticed, and helpfully pointed out to me during our weekly lunch dates, that Emma's crises always seemed to occur when David was available, never when he was in meetings or out of the office. That Emma's confusion about certain tasks was oddly selective. She could navigate complex social situations, but apparently couldn't master a drop-down menu. "She's performing helplessness," Rachel had observed, "and she's quite good at it. But the thing about performances is that they require an audience. We just need to make sure the right people are watching." The opportunity presented itself at the company's quarterly dinner, held at an upscale restaurant downtown. It was a formal affair, and I'd worn a burgundy dress that David had always loved. Rachel, who'd been invited as David's mother and a longtime friend of the company's founders, had worn an elegant black pantsuit and her signature pearl necklace. Emma had arrived in a white dress that looked almost bridal, her hair in soft curls. She'd immediately gravitated toward David, though she'd been smart enough to acknowledge me first. "Sarah, you look amazing," she'd said with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. That color is perfect on you. Thank you, Emma. You look lovely as well. We'd all been seated at a large table with several other colleagues and their spouses. Emma had managed to position herself across from David, with Rachel and me on either side of him. Throughout dinner, I'd watched her work the room with impressive skill, charming to the executives, sweet to their spouses, and consistently directing admiring glances at my husband. The after-dinner portion of the evening had included informal mingling, and that's when Rachel had struck. Emma had been telling a story about her recent disaster with a client presentation, playing up her own mistakes for sympathy and laughs. The group around her had been listening politely, and David had been about to jump in with reassurance when Rachel had spoken up. You know, Emma, Rachel had said conversationally, I've been meaning to ask you something. David mentioned you were having trouble with the database reporting system, and I was curious about it since I volunteer with a nonprofit that uses the same platform. My 72-year-old colleague manages the entire donor database on her own, and she's never used a computer before last year. What specifically is giving you trouble? The question had been delivered with such apparent innocence that it had taken Emma a moment to realize she'd been cornered. The implication was clear to everyone listening. If a septuagenarian computer novice could manage the system, what exactly was Emma's excuse? Emma's smile had frozen. Oh, well, it's just, there are certain advanced features that are tricky. Which ones? Rachel had pressed gently. Maybe I can help. I've learned quite a bit about it. It's probably too technical to explain at a dinner party. Emma had tried to deflect. Try me, Rachel had said with a warm smile that didn't reach her eyes. I love learning new things. I'd watched the calculation happen behind Emma's eyes. She couldn't claim the system was too complex without looking incompetent. She couldn't explain specific technical problems without revealing that she'd been exaggerating her difficulties. And she couldn't gracefully exit the conversation without looking evasive. Actually, one of the senior partners had interjected, clearly interested now. I'd love to hear about any system challenges our team is facing. We paid a lot of money for that platform specifically because it was supposed to be intuitive. Emma had looked genuinely distressed for the first time that evening, and it wasn't an act. I think I might have just been overwhelmed at first. I'm getting better with it now. That's wonderful, Rachel had said brightly. And I'm sure David appreciates having more time to focus on his own projects now that you're managing independently. The conversation had moved on, but I'd noticed several things. David had looked thoughtful, as if he was reconsidering some assumptions. A few of Emma's colleagues had exchanged knowing glances, and Emma herself had been noticeably quieter for the rest of the evening. Rachel had caught my eye across the table and given me the subtlest of winks. The real turning point had come 2 weeks later, at the office itself. Rachel had coordinated with me beforehand, suggesting that I bring lunch to David as a surprise. Just trust me, she'd said, and try to arrive around noon. I'd shown up at David's office with sandwiches from his favorite deli, and he'd been genuinely delighted to see me. We'd been eating and chatting when Emma had appeared in the doorway, right on schedule. David, I hate to interrupt your lunch, but I really need your help with... She'd stopped when she'd seen me, and her expression had flickered with irritation before she'd smoothed it over. Oh, Sarah, I didn't know you were here. Surprise visit, I'd said cheerfully. What did you need help with? Emma had hesitated, clearly not wanting to play the helpless routine in front of me. Just a quick question about the Henderson account, but it can wait. No, please, I'd insisted, genuinely curious now. Don't let me interrupt. What's the problem? Emma had looked trapped. It's just, the timeline seems really aggressive, and I was going to ask David if he thought it was realistic. David had pulled up his calendar. The Henderson timeline? That's pretty standard for that type of project. We've done similar ones before. Right, but Emma had been floundering now, clearly having expected David to simply agree to help without question. But what? I'd asked, keeping my tone light and interested. I just worry about the client expectations, Emma had finally said. That's a valid concern, David had replied. Why don't you send me your project plan and I'll take a look at it this afternoon. If there are potential issues, we can address them in the team meeting tomorrow. It had been a perfectly professional response, but it had also been notably different from David's usual pattern of dropping everything to help Emma immediately. Something had shifted. Emma had left shortly after, and David had turned to me with a slightly sheepish expression. "I think I might have been enabling her," he'd said quietly. "What do you mean?" "Emma, I've been so focused on trying to help her succeed that I haven't really questioned whether she actually needs as much help as she's been asking for. My mom said something at the dinner that got me thinking, and then today, I don't know, something felt different about how she asked for help, more strategic than genuine. I'd felt a wave of relief that he was finally seeing it, but I'd kept my response measured. She might just be trying to find her footing in a new role. Maybe, David had agreed, but I think I need to start setting better boundaries. It's not fair to you that I'm spending so much time focused on helping a coworker with things she should probably be figuring out on her own. And it's not actually helping her grow if I'm always swooping in to rescue her. I'd reached across the desk and squeezed his hand. "I trust you to figure out the right balance." "I know you do," he'd said, his eyes warm. "And I'm sorry if I've been oblivious about the situation. You've been incredibly patient." The final act of Rachel's covert justice had come at the next company team building event, held at a local bowling alley. It was meant to be casual and fun, and I'd been invited along with several other spouses. Emma had shown up in an outfit that was somehow both athletic and calculated to look cute. Leggings and an oversized sweater that kept sliding off one shoulder. She'd positioned herself on David's team for bowling, and I'd ended up on the opposing team with Rachel and several of David's colleagues. During the second round, Emma had somehow managed to injure her wrist, not seriously, but enough to require attention and sympathy. She'd made a small sound of pain and had cradled her arm dramatically. "Are you all right?" David had asked, concerned. "I think I just tweaked it," Emma had said bravely. "I'll be fine." "We should get some ice," David had started to say, but Rachel had smoothly intervened. "I have a first aid kit in my car," she'd announced. "Emma, why don't you come with me? I've got compression wraps and ice packs. I always keep them for my tennis injuries." Emma had had no choice but to follow Rachel out to the parking lot. What had happened during those 15 minutes, I'd never know exactly. But when they'd returned, Emma's demeanor had been completely different. She'd been subdued, almost chastened, and she'd stayed notably distant from David for the rest of the evening. Later, when I'd asked Rachel what she'd said, she'd just smiled mysteriously. "I simply explained," Rachel had said, "that I've lived long enough to recognize when someone is confusing professional kindness with personal interest, and that while I think Emma is a talented young woman, she'd be much better served focusing on her actual career development rather than manufacturing crises to get attention from a happily married man." "You didn't," I'd gasped, half horrified and half impressed. "Oh, I did. And I did it very kindly and with genuine concern for her well-being. I also pointed out that her current strategy was making her look less competent to colleagues who might otherwise respect her work, and that she was much smarter than she'd been pretending to be." "What did she say?" "She cried a bit. Real tears this time, I think. And then she thanked me." Rachel had shrugged. "Sometimes people need to hear difficult truths from someone who isn't emotionally invested in the situation. I'm not her colleague or her supervisor or her romantic interest. I'm just an older woman who's seen this pattern before and has no reason to lie to her about it." In the weeks that followed, Emma's behavior had changed noticeably. She'd stopped appearing at David's office with manufactured crises. She'd started asking other colleagues for help when she needed it, distributing her questions more evenly across the team. She'd even approached me at one company event to make awkward but seemingly genuine small talk about a book I'd been reading. David had noticed the shift, too. "Emma seems to be doing really well lately," he'd commented one evening. "She's handling projects independently and even offered to help train the new intern on the database system." "That's great," I'd replied sincerely. "Maybe she just needed time to find her confidence. Or maybe I needed to stop rescuing her so she could prove to herself that she's capable," David had said thoughtfully. "Either way, I'm glad she's thriving. And I'm sorry again if I was too dense to see what was really going on." I'd kissed him then, touched by his genuine concern for everyone involved. You weren't dense. You were kind. There's a difference. Still, I should have been more aware. My mom certainly was. Your mother, I'd said with affection, is a force of nature. She likes you a lot, you know, David had replied, pulling me close. She told me I'd be an idiot if I ever took you for granted. Said you handled the whole situation with more grace than most people would have. I had good backup, I'd admitted. To the final chapter of the Emma situation had come 3 months later, when she'd announced she was leaving the company for a position at a competitor. David had been supportive, and I'd sent her a polite congratulatory message. The day before her last day, Emma had stopped by our house unannounced. I'd been surprised to find her at the door, but I'd invited her in for coffee. I wanted to apologize, she'd said, once we were seated in the living room. For the way I acted when I first started at the company, it was unprofessional and inappropriate. I'd appreciated her directness. Thank you for saying that. Your mother-in-law helped me see some things about myself that I needed to see, Emma had continued. She was honest with me in a way that no one else had been, and it made me realize I was sabotaging myself. I've spent the last few months actually working on my skills and building genuine professional relationships, and I feel better about myself than I have in years. I'm glad, I'd said, meaning it. You were really patient with me, Emma had added, more patient than I deserved. You could have made things difficult for me, and you didn't. I trusted my husband, I'd replied simply. And I figured you'd either figure things out or you wouldn't. Creating drama wouldn't have helped anyone. Emma had smiled ruefully. Rachel said you were smarter than I was giving you credit for. She was right. After she'd left, I'd called Rachel to tell her about the visit. Good for her, Rachel had said approvingly. It takes courage to apologize, especially when you don't have to. Maybe she'll be more genuine in her next position. You know, I'd said. I never properly thanked you for the way you handled all of this. Nonsense. That's what mothers-in-law are for, protecting the family from external nonsense without starting wars. Is that the official job description? It should be, Rachel had laughed, along with strategic interference when necessary and selective memory about past family drama. 6 months later, I'd run into Emma at a professional conference. She'd been friendly but not effusive. And we'd had a genuinely pleasant conversation about our respective career developments. She'd mentioned she was dating someone new, someone from outside the office, and she'd seemed honestly happy. I learned a lot from that whole experience, she'd told me over conference coffee, about myself, about professional boundaries, and about the difference between being genuinely vulnerable and performing vulnerability. Those are good lessons, I'd agreed. Your mother-in-law is terrifying, by the way, Emma had added with a smile. In the best possible way, I'd replied. Absolutely in the best possible way. That evening, I'd come home to find David and Rachel already in the kitchen, working together on dinner preparations. David had been chopping vegetables while Rachel had been telling him a story about one of her tennis partners, both of them laughing. There's my favorite daughter-in-law, Rachel had greeted me. I'm your only daughter-in-law, I'd pointed out, as I always did. Which makes you both my favorite and my least favorite, she'd replied with a grin. How was the conference? Productive, and I ran into Emma. Both David and Rachel had looked up with interest. She seems well, I'd continued. Happy in her new position, dating someone, and she wanted me to tell you, Rachel, that you're terrifying. Rachel had looked immensely pleased with herself. I do try to maintain my reputation. David had shaken his head with affectionate exasperation. I'm still not entirely sure what happened between you two in that parking lot. Some things, Rachel had said mysteriously, are best left between women who understand the art of subtle warfare. Subtle warfare? David had repeated, looking between us. Don't worry about it, sweetheart, I'd assured him, kissing his cheek. Just know that your mother is very good at protecting the people she loves. Should I be concerned? Only if you ever give me reason to be, I'd replied lightly. Which he won't, Rachel had added firmly, because he's not an idiot, and he knows how lucky he is. David had put down his knife and wrapped an arm around each of us. I do know how lucky I am. To have both of you and to have you looking out for each other. And looking out for you, I'd added, even when you're too oblivious to realize you need it. Especially then, Rachel had agreed. Later that night, after Rachel had gone home and David and I were getting ready for bed, he'd pulled me close. You really never worried? He'd asked. About Emma, I mean? About you leaving me for her? No, I'd answered honestly. I know who you are, David, and I know what we have together. But I won't pretend it wasn't annoying to watch her manipulate situations. I should have seen it sooner. You saw it when you needed to see it, I'd replied. And the important thing is that everyone came out of the situation better than they went into it. Emma learned something valuable about herself. You learned something about setting boundaries. And I learned that your mother is an even better ally than I already knew she was. David had laughed. She does seem to have a gift for solving problems in unconventional ways. It's not unconventional, I'd corrected. It's just subtle. The best kind of justice usually is. Covert justice, David had quoted, remembering Rachel's phrase. Exactly. No drama, no public confrontations, no burned bridges. Just strategic awareness and well-timed interventions that help everyone save face while still learning their lessons. You two are formidable together, David had observed. We really are, I'd agreed with satisfaction. As I'd turned off the light and settled into David's arms, I'd thought about how the whole situation had played out. There had been no explosive confrontations, no ultimatums, no damaged reputations. Just patience, observation, and a mother-in-law with impeccable timing, and a gift for delivering difficult truths wrapped in apparent kindness. Emma had left with her dignity intact and some valuable self-awareness. David had learned to recognize manipulation disguised as helplessness, and I'd gained an even deeper appreciation for Rachel's particular brand of protective interference. Sometimes I'd realized the most effective way to handle a problem isn't to attack it directly. It's to change the dynamics so subtly that everyone involved starts making different choices without even realizing they've been guided in a new direction. That's the art of subtle warfare, and Rachel had proven herself a master of it. What are you smiling about? David had murmured sleepily. Just thinking about how lucky I am, I'd replied, to have married into a family where the women are smart, strategic, and fiercely protective of each other. Mom does adore you, David had said. She told me once that you were the daughter she always wanted. She told me the same thing, I'd admitted. Right before she said that anyone who tried to mess with our family would have to deal with both of us. David had chuckled. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Don't worry, I'd assured him. As long as you keep being exactly who you are, kind, loving, and occasionally oblivious in the most endearing ways, you have nothing to worry about. Good to know, he'd said, kissing my forehead. Though I think I'll try to be slightly less oblivious going forward. That would be appreciated, I'd replied with a smile. And as I drifted off to sleep, I'd felt genuinely grateful, not just for my husband and his mother, but for the quiet knowledge that when challenges arose, we faced them together. Not with drama or confrontation, but with intelligence, patience, and just the right amount of strategic interference. Sometimes the best victories are the ones where everyone walks away better than they started, even if only a few people know there was a battle at all. That's the real art of it.